You fired her for protecting an elderly man. What a disgrace. Imagine this. Working at the same place for 20 years, pouring your heart into your job, treating your customers like family, only to be thrown out for doing what any decent person would do. That's exactly what happened to Emma Thompson. She wasn't just a waitress at Johnny's Diner. She was part of the soul of that small-town restaurant, someone who knew everyone's order by heart and made sure no one ever felt alone. But one day, everything changed. It started like any other afternoon. The rain pattered against the windows. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and regulars were settled into their usual booths. Then, an elderly man walked in. Frank Morrison, a retired biker who'd been coming to Johnny's for as long as anyone could remember. He had that quiet dignity about him, the kind of man who didn't say much. But when he did, people listened. And on that day, he was met with something he didn't deserve: disrespect. A group of teenagers, privileged and cocky, sitting at a corner booth, saw him walk by and decided to have their fun. Cruel words, laughter at his expense, snide remarks that cut deeper than they realized. Frank, being the kind of man he was, didn't react. He just kept walking, but anyone paying attention could see it. The slight slump in his shoulders, the way his usual smile faded. And then, one of those kids stuck out his foot, trying to trip him. Emma saw it happen. She could have ignored it, could have let it slide like so many others might have. But that wasn't who she was. She stepped in, her voice steady, her message clear. Johnny's Diner wasn't a place for bullies. Not on her watch. She stood up for what was right, and in return, she was fired on the spot. But what Richard Blake, the diner's new owner, didn't realize was that Emma wasn't alone. 2 hours later, the sound of engines rumbled through the streets, and Justice rode into town on 500 motorcycles. Now, let me ask you this. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. In a quiet American town, there was a place where people didn't just come to eat. They came to feel at home. Johnny's Diner had stood on the same corner for more than 50 years, its red and chrome exterior as much a part of the town's identity as the courthouse or the old movie theater. Inside, the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee greeted every guest, and the sound of laughter mixed with the clinking of plates created a melody all its own. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a gathering place, a refuge, a piece of history where friendships were formed and memories were made. At the heart of it all was Emma Thompson. For 20 years, she had been the soul of Johnny's Diner. More than just a waitress, she was a friend, a confidant, someone who could brighten a person's day with a warm smile and a knowing glance. She knew every regular's name, their favorite dishes, and even the stories behind their worn-out work boots or tired smiles. She had seen young couples nervously sitting down for first dates and, years later, bringing in their children to share a meal. She had watched as an elderly man sat alone after losing his wife, making sure his coffee cup was always full and his heart never too heavy. Emma didn't just serve food. She served comfort, kindness, and connection. But change was coming. Johnny, the kind-hearted owner who had built the diner into what it was, decided it was time to retire. He had always run the place with warmth, treating his staff and customers like family. So when he handed the business over to his son Richard, many hoped that the tradition would continue. But it didn't take long for people to realize that Richard wasn't his father. Where Johnny had seen faces, Richard saw dollar signs. He started making changes, subtle at first, then more drastic. Prices went up, the classic menu was altered, and the inviting, no-frills atmosphere was slowly being replaced with something colder, more impersonal. The regulars felt it. The sense of community began to slip away. Emma watched helplessly as longtime customers came less often, some disappearing altogether, replaced by strangers who didn't care about the history or the warmth that had once defined the place. Then came the day that changed everything. The rain drummed against the windows of Johnny's Diner, a steady rhythm that matched the slow hum of conversation inside. The afternoon was quiet, familiar, the kind of day where everything seemed to move at its own slow pace. Emma was behind the counter, refilling coffee cups and exchanging warm smiles with the handful of regulars who had braved the weather. Then, the front door swung open, and in stepped Frank Morrison. At 75, Frank carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen a lifetime of change but had never let it shake him. His black leather jacket, worn and creased with time, was a badge of honor, a testament to decades of stories. He walked with purpose, heading straight for his usual booth near the back. Above it hung a faded photograph, Frank and Johnny, side by side in 1968, two young men standing proudly beside their motorcycles. The warmth of the diner had always been a comfort, but today, something felt off. A group of teenagers sat in the corner, their laughter too loud, their whispers not as quiet as they thought. Emma had seen them before, kids from the private school a few blocks away, always flashing their parents' credit cards and treating the place like their personal playground. "Look at that old guy," one of them snickered, elbowing his friend. "Should have left the motorcycle at the retirement home." Another smirked. "Bet he doesn't even remember where he parked it." Emma's grip on the coffee pot tightened. Frank, as always, said nothing. He simply kept walking, his expression unreadable, his dignity intact. But she saw it. The slight drop in his shoulders, the weariness in his step. Then one of the teens stretched out a foot. The movement was subtle, almost lazy, but its intent was clear. Frank didn't see it. In that split second, Emma reacted. She moved fast, catching Frank's arm just before he could stumble. The diner went silent. Her heart pounded. 20 years of memories flooded her mind. Every story Frank had told, every kind word he had offered. This was his place, just as much as anyone else's. And these kids, these entitled, smirking kids, thought they could take that from him. Not on her watch. That's it. Her voice was calm, but firm. She turned to the teenagers, her eyes steady. "Pack up your things and leave. We don't serve bullies here." The teens looked stunned. No one had ever spoken to them like that before. "Do you know who my father is?" One of them sneered. "He's on the city council." Emma didn't blink. "I don't care if your father is the president. You don't treat people like that in here. Not in Johnny's diner. Not ever." The tension in the room thickened. The other customers watched in silence, some nodding in quiet approval. Then, from the back, Richard's voice sliced through the air. "Emma." She turned. Richard stood with his arms crossed, his face twisted in irritation. "You can't throw out paying customers." Emma lifted her chin. They were trying to trip an elderly man. "That's dangerous and cruel." Richard's expression darkened. "Then you're fired." Silence. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Emma exhaled slowly, set down the coffee pot, and untied her apron. She folded it neatly, placed it on the counter, and turned back to Frank. A soft smile touched her lips. "You take care of yourself, Frank." Then, without another word, she walked toward the door. Her heart pounded, but she held her head high. Because at the end of the day, there were things more important than a job. There was right and wrong. And Emma Thompson had never been one to stand by and watch injustice happen. As Emma stepped out into the rain, the door of Johnny's diner shutting behind her, she didn't look back. She had done the right thing. But right now, that didn't change the fact that she had just lost her job, the only source of stability she had known for 20 years. Inside, Frank Morrison sat still for a moment, gripping his coffee cup. Then, with the calm resolve of a man who had faced far worse in his life, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, weathered by time and experience, moved quickly over the screen. He wasn't just sending a message. He was calling in a brotherhood. Within minutes, the word had spread. The Iron Veterans Motorcycle Club wasn't just any group of bikers. They were a family, bonded not only by the road, but by a deep sense of loyalty and justice. Some of them were retired military, others lifelong bikers. All of them men and women who believed in something bigger than themselves. And today, that something was Emma. 2 hours later, the quiet town was shaken by a deep, steady rumble. It started as a distant hum, but quickly grew louder, rolling through the streets like an oncoming storm. People stepped out of their homes and shops, looking down the road as headlights appeared through the misty rain. Motorcycles, dozens, then hundreds of them, filled the streets. One by one, they parked, lining the road in front of Johnny's diner. The leather-clad riders dismounted, adjusting their jackets, their patches bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Iron Veterans. They didn't need to say a word. Their presence alone spoke volumes. Inside the diner, Richard had been pacing, still fuming over what had happened. The sudden vibration of the ground beneath him made him stop. He glanced out the window, and his face turned pale. Frank was the first to step inside. He moved with purpose, his boots clicking against the tile floor as he made his way toward the counter. The bikers followed behind, their presence a silent but unmistakable force. "This diner used to stand for something," Frank said, his voice even but firm. Johnny understood that. It wasn't about money. It was about respect. Richard swallowed hard. Before he could finish, another figure stepped forward. A tall woman with sharp eyes and a steady gaze, her leather vest adorned with patches that spoke of years of dedication. Susan Martinez, president of the Iron Veterans, leveled her gaze at Richard. "We've spoken to your father," she said. "He's agreed to sell the diner to us. The paperwork is being signed as we speak." Richard's face drained of color. "You can't do that." Susan's lips curled into a knowing smile. "It's already done," he stammered, his hands clenching into fists. But there was nothing left to say. The decision had been made. The diner, the legacy that Johnny had built, would now belong to those who had truly cared for it all along. A slow murmur rippled through the diner as the realization set in. The regulars, those who had watched the slow decline of their beloved gathering place, sat in quiet awe. Justice had arrived, not in the form of lawyers or paperwork, but on the backs of those who had always believed in standing up for what was right. Susan turned to Frank, then looked at the rest of the room. "And our first act as new owners?" She let the question linger before finishing with a smile. "Making him the manager." A cheer erupted, breaking through the tension. The bikers, the regulars, even the staff who had been too afraid to speak up before. Everyone felt the weight of the moment, a moment of righting a wrong. Outside, the rain had stopped, the clouds beginning to break apart. As the bikes remained lined up outside Johnny's diner, it was clear, this was no longer Richard's place. This was home again. The story spread like wildfire. Local news outlets picked it up, calling it a testament to standing up for what's right. Social media exploded with support, people sharing the tale of a small-town waitress who refused to back down and a community that refused to let her stand alone. Strangers from across the country sent messages of encouragement, some even making trips just to have a meal at Johnny's diner and shake Emma's hand. Inside the diner, things felt different now. The warm, familiar hum of conversation had returned, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon once again a comforting embrace. The customers, regulars and new faces alike, came in not just for a meal, but for the experience of being somewhere that meant something. Emma, with her steady hands and welcoming smile, ran the place the same way she always had, ensuring that kindness was served alongside every plate. She never let the events of that fateful day change her, but she did let them strengthen her resolve. Respect wasn't just an idea at Johnny's diner. It was a way of life. And the teenagers? They returned, but not to cause trouble. A week later, they walked through the door with hesitant steps, their usual arrogance replaced by something else, humility. Frank was sitting at his usual booth when they approached him. One of the boys, the same one who had tried to trip him, cleared his throat before speaking. "We're sorry, sir," he said, his voice quieter than before. "For what we said, for what we did. We didn't know." Frank studied them for a long moment before nodding. "You know now," he said simply, motioning to the empty seats at his booth. They hesitated, then sat down, and for the first time, they listened. As for Richard, he attempted to start over, opening an upscale restaurant across town. But something was missing. The people never truly came. The warmth that once made Johnny's diner special was nowhere to be found. He had learned too late that a business isn't just about profits. It's about people. The new sign outside Johnny's diner now reads, "Everyone's welcome, as long as you bring respect." Beneath it, a line of motorcycles remains parked, rain or shine, a quiet but powerful reminder of what happened that day. A reminder that kindness, courage, and community will always stand stronger than cruelty and greed. What do you think? Would you have stood up like Emma did? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's always another story of kindness and courage waiting to be told. See you next time.